Broadcasting from the Unshackled studios in Melbourne. This is WilmsFront, brought to you by the Unshackled.net. Now here's Tim Wilms.
Hello everyone and welcome back to WilmsFront. It's the first show in a week. I'll get to the reasons why a little later on. The date is Wednesday the 13th of March 2020. It is 6:38 p.m. here in Melbourne. Starting earlier tonight, Victorians have had a slight taste of freedom with Premier Dan allowing social visits, but the campaign to get our rights fully restored is far from over. We are live currently on the WilmsFront YouTube channel. You can interact directly with myself and my guests by asking a question or sending a super chat through Entropy. I've put the link in the live chat and the description, and we are also simulcast on DLive. All right, let's get straight into our first featured guest for tonight's show. I'm sure many of you saw the ugly and aggressive actions of Victoria Police in shutting down the Mother's Day anti-lockdown protests outside Victoria's Parliament House. It was peaceful until Victoria Police moved in to break up the protest. They had to break social distancing themselves to enforce social distancing. This was right in the middle of a speech by one of the faces of the new online freedom movement in Australia, which has grown exponentially in the past week. Fanos Panayides. I have a lot of Greek viewers, and so I know you won't mind, but they'll probably wring my neck for mispronouncing. Thank you so much, Fanos, for agreeing to come on the show tonight. I know you've said in your Facebook Live videos that you will not speak to the mainstream media, as on Sunday they had reporters on the ground, but deliberately in their news reports that evening misrepresented what happened. And so you've been live streaming into your Facebook group 99% Unite. It's us or them. And you were taken away. I saw they grabbed your face when you were reading a Bible verse about the mark of the beast and microchips, where, in my opinion, it's the most egregious, I would say, abuse of police powers, and the worst violation of the right to free speech and free assembly I've ever seen, and I've attended and covered a lot of these protests.
Yeah, so look, the whole thing about saying the mark of the beast wasn't about it wasn't about trying to be religious as such. It was trying to be about showing that this stuff's been spoken about hundreds of years ago, and what they're looking at implementing and what they're doing at the moment is all working towards a cashless, monitored society where everyone's got a microchip and everyone's tracked.
Which is, and people, I would say, are rightly suspicious about the how we've been told during this pandemic not to use cash. The touch and go limits in supermarkets and other places have been increased to, I think, $200. But I am noticing now a lot of businesses starting to accept cash again, albeit reluctantly, because we've all seen Australian money says legal tender. Yeah.
So it's really inconvenient if you look at the laws that started passing and everything that started falling into place quite conveniently, trying to pass bills so you can't spend more than $10,000 at a time and making it a criminal offence if you do have that much money on you, right? Getting rid of cash as it's seen as a vehicle to transmit the virus, but it can't spread on, the stainless steel rail at the train station, or the rubber the rubber guide that you carry up the escalators at a train station, or you can't get it off the peas when you grab them off the shelf and put them back. It's ridiculous that, they're so quick to just get rid of cash out of society and using the virus as a vehicle to do so. I think that's very, very convenient, wouldn't you say?
Well, it aligns two goals, and I certainly, this is my perspective. I'm not, you can go into your own perspective, but I don't believe that there's an overall. It was planned, this pandemic, but in my experience, in every crisis, there's an opportunity for people who have various agendas to implement it. Obviously, I would like to see us emerge from this pandemic as a more free and independent nation. But of course, there's other political players who've got other ideas. And you mentioned obviously the microchip, which they've been trying to get those installed in people since 9/11, but they're being a bit more subtle now. And the most obvious example of how they want to track us is through the COVID safe tracking app. And I'm going to
already talked about through Parliament, though, don't you?
The microchip.
There's something called emerging technologies, and part of the emerging technologies that they're considering, right, that they're looking to bring into power are biometric passports, which is a measurement of a part of your body, like checking the shape of your eye or your palm print or whatever else, as identifying who you are, and an implantable microchip. So this isn't science fiction. They're talking about it, and they're getting ready to implement it. And this COVID safe app that's designed to track the death of we've had 98 people die in 16 weeks, and we're dealing with a pandemic, really? And you want to implement an app that's not even effective in the way it works in its functionality in the interest of public safety, yet it's not going to stop no virus from getting around? That doesn't make sense.
And everyone's forgotten that I actually did in-depth research today on the deadly flu season we had during 2019. And my audience knows that I got the flu last winter, so did a lot of my colleagues and associates. I was knocked down for 3 weeks. It was absolutely horrible. 900 Australians died of the flu last year, and we didn't shut down the economy and have mass surveillance. And in 2017, actually 1,100 people died that year. And the obvious, and going through sorry, I'm just going to, I'll bring up the document here. So there was a total number of cases last winter. 310,000 people presented to Australian health services with influenza, and a lot of people would have just soldiered on. Yeah, we've shut down and introduced surveillance because of 7,000 infections and 98 deaths. Yeah,
it's ridiculous. It's not even 7,000. It's less than 7,000. 6,900 and something. It's ridiculous. The amount of deaths. Sorry to correct you. I know you were rounding it off.
Yeah, wasn't rounding it off to exaggerate. That's the difference.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, I get. I understand that you don't have sinister motives for why you're doing your show, man. That's what I'm talking about, Tim. Look, at the end of the day, what they're doing is ridiculous. It doesn't make sense. If anything, the amount of deaths that have happened due to other things in the world have dramatically decreased, especially in Australia, right? And they've inflated, and the figures that they're presenting, I've got inside information of healthcare workers who have told me, and people that have gone to hospitals, that their family members have been listed as a death, as a symptom, with symptoms of coronavirus. You don't, as a physician, announce a death of someone because of the symptoms of an illness. You announce them dead because of what killed them: lung failure, heart failure, a blood clot in the brain, which caused something else. So for them to come and say something ridiculous like someone died as of symptoms of something else, that's the biggest. It just doesn't make sense. That's not accurate. That's just, how do you go against everything that you've ever done before? And now your rationale can be explained because of what? a directive that's been given to you by an upper organisation that has nothing to do with the way you do your job, World Health Organization. Doesn't make sense.
Those types of or misdiagnosis of cause of death, they've seeped out into the online sphere, and obviously, we've talked about the powers that government can accrue through new technology, but they can also be used to the people's advantage as well. You are talking to me right now through a smartphone, which there were countless smartphones that were filming Sunday's Mother's Day anti-lockdown protest, and we're able to see exactly what happened throughout the day and who clearly was the aggressor, which you wouldn't get from the 1 minute report from 7 or 9 News that evening.
No, you wouldn't. If you had a chance to see the speech I said, even after the way the police had treated people, I still gave the police accolades and said that their job's easy, because I've worked in an environment where you have to maintain order, right? Even after what they'd done by dragging one of the speakers there and smashing his head into the ground when they arrested him, when there was no need to, right? And when they didn't even have a power to arrest him, because, not following a public health order is not an indictable offence, right? There's no need to use that type of force and grab that person, right? And they grabbed people when they felt like it, not when they saw them, because there was hundreds of people there. So why did they only grab the people who they saw were some type of, let's say, an influencer or a person who was a person of, of priority there, so to speak, or a person who was someone who had, a part in it, if that makes sense.
It seemed to me, looking at it, that the police just sort of, they acted out of panic, like, we've got to do something because we're taking orders from above. And when any type of authority person is not thinking rationally and panicking, that's a disaster like that can occur. I noticed in the footage I had on a couple of weeks back, Nick Patterson, who is keeping his MMA training clinic open, he was thrown to the ground by police and put in the back of the paddy wagon. The Victoria Police said they made 10 arrests, and these people were given summons to appear in court, and 3 were charged with assault of police.
They didn't give me a summons to appear in court. I even said to them, so what are you guys going to do? And they go, oh, you'll receive an infringement. I go, okay. I go, is that a summary offence then? They go, yeah. I go, okay, no problem. So under section 458, subsection 3, reason no longer continues, I can go now, right? And the police said, yep. And within 25 minutes after them opening the door to the van, they let me straight out. Didn't tell me I was going to have a summons to appear in court. Didn't tell me anything like that. Because the fact of the matter is, the reason they're arresting people is against a public health directive, not a law. There's a difference between a directive and a regulation and a law. A law goes through 2 houses of parliament and then does royal assent and is approved by the Queen, right? These directives haven't been approved by anyone apart from the Queen of Australia, which doesn't even exist. It's a corporation. There's no such thing as the Queen of Australia. So every law these guys have been writing circa 1970 doesn't actually hold water. And everything they're actually doing at the moment doesn't actually have a proper legal standing. But as Winston Churchill said, the length of the document defends it against being read.
I've heard that type of argument before, and the Know Your Rights advocates, they certainly educate people on those sort of legal irregularities. But the way that I see it, at the end of the day, it's the people, or the sheeple who still they provide the legitimacy through their obedience to governments, police forces and that. And the reason they've been able to give these penalty infringement notices out so frequently is because the people have just accepted it. I'm not sure if anyone has been foolish enough to pay the $1,658 fine to be exact. They're a fool if they do, but you're also a fool if police pull you over and ask where you are and you tell them and then they deem, oh, that's not an essential. You should say none of your business, because then they don't know why you're out.
Well, technically, you don't need to tell the police unless you have been arrested. Because I used to teach security, so I understand the powers of arrest very well. And under Section 458 and Section 459, police have certain powers to arrest. Now, the powers to arrest that police have come under Section 458, and Section 458 has certain parameters that need to be followed. But a civilian arrests with very much of the same powers as police do under Section 458. And if you're going to stop someone for no reason and tell them to identify themselves, they don't need to, because they have the right to go. Technically, if a person asks, am I under arrest or am I free to go, until the officer says you're under arrest, technically they don't need to give their name and address, because there's no legal standing for the police to be stopping them from their liberties as a free person to choose to go where they please. Yeah? They have to say, I have a reasonable belief that you've committed an offence. They have to say that. They have to have a reasonable belief that you've committed some type of offence. Otherwise, what they're doing is just abusing power that they don't even have, that they think they have, because they think it's been instilled upon them, but they don't have it. And they're working out of this illusion that, you know, they're well within their rights because they've been given orders to, and it's a directive. I'm sorry, it's a directive. It's not a law. There's a big difference.
So they claim, and I'm going to put it in that terms, that their authority comes from this declaration of a state of emergency, and which it was due to expire on May 11th, and now has been extended until May 31st, and this has been an act of Parliament, the Emergency Management Act of 2013, which, to best of my knowledge, came out of a recommendation of the Bushfires Royal Commission. But the Premier can just enact it whenever he likes. It's a huge amount of executive power. And of course, it was, I think, fitting that the demonstration was on Mother's Day, when Victorians were told. When they say asked or told, it's mean we're making it illegal for you to visit your mother on Mother's Day. And
well, they alluded to it. Yeah, They didn't say you can't, but they said it would probably be a good idea. If you're thinking about it, probably don't. Yeah.
Because Daniel Andrews, he actually said it in his extended press conference, that we don't want anyone to the morgue after Mother's Day, that visiting your mother, you could kill her. And I'm not sure if you remember the so-called bonking ban, which lasted 6 hours, that Daniel Andrews said visiting your partner who you don't live with, that's not a legitimate form of medical care, because is that really worth a life? That you could kill somebody by getting in your car, driving to your partner who you didn't live with and spending time or whatever. This was the absurdity of the situation. To your knowledge, have you killed anyone during this pandemic by meeting people?
Yeah. So say that question again, Tim. The last part.
Have you killed anyone during this pandemic by meeting with them?
No. Definitely not. Not at the moment.
Because that was the health authorities. what they said to the protesters, that you're putting the community at risk. Though, of course, people don't have to associate with you if they don't want to. If they see you down the street, they can just walk away.
Yeah. So, listen, if I had seen a virus that was infectious and contagious like it was claimed to be, had ripped through Australia like wildfire, and we had 200,000-300,000 people in hospital, I would have created a movement that kept people in their home. Right? The only reason those people were standing on those steps, and I'm not taking ownership of that because I didn't organise it. I heard there was going to be something on Sunday, and I said, screw it, let's go down as well. Right? Now, in regards to a public health concern, okay, what about when there's 50 or 60 customers that walk into Bunnings? Or, you know, when there's 30, 40 plus people walk into a supermarket picking stuff and putting it back? Or when that person who's putting the groceries through is standing in front of maybe 60 or 70 people a day and they're being breathed on, right? You think everyone's standing 1.5 meters away? What about the cops that are going and grabbing someone 6 or 7 at a time? So let me get this right. You're out there in the interest of public safety. There's a guy standing there with a pram on his own, not near anyone, and you went and, in the interest of public safety, approached that person with 7 or 8 police, stood within 1.5 meters of them, which is your golden rule not to do, and then arrested that person when what were they doing? Just standing there? So you can violate public safety because your job's essential. I'm sorry, I don't get that. So because your job's essential, does that mean the virus won't spread when you're standing 1.5 meters within each other? So how come this thing hasn't spread through Victoria Police like wildfire if it's so contagious? Why hasn't it gone through there like wildfire, considering these guys almost sit on top of each other? Because the virus chooses where it goes now. So we've got a virus that is intelligent and doesn't go after law enforcement. It only goes after the guy who wants to go throw a fishing rod in the water, or the people who are speaking about their concerns. And I said it when I was there. I said, I'm not here to protest. I said, we're here to ask questions. We're here to demand answers. We're here to ask questions. Why? Because people have sent letters into government. No one's answered. People have sent letters into their political parties and gone through the right channels. No one's replied back. Right? We're here because we're getting told to download an app when there's 98 people dead in 16 weeks, and I have to download an app to go somewhere. We're here to have our questions answered. I wasn't there for a 5G conspiracy theory thing, right? I wasn't there about Bill Gates and microchips and all the other crap they were talking about, even though half that stuff's still true, right? I wasn't there voicing that stuff because that is not the forum you have that type of conversation. I was there to have an honest, proper, concerning speak out about what's going on. And the reason the police grabbed me is because they knew that everything I said, that everyone was hearing it, and everyone was reflecting with what I was saying, and they were taking it in, right? And they saw me as a danger and a threat, the whole narrative, that's what's going on at the moment. And that's really why they dragged me away, because they saw me there the whole day, and they didn't drag me away until they saw me getting ready to out the fact that people want to put a microchip in everyone, and that's been spoken about in Scripture for hundreds of years. And the same Bible that I wasn't allowed to read from was from the same Bible that all our laws are founded upon, because most of our laws from England go back to King James Bible, right? So you're telling me we can have laws based upon the King James Bible, but I can't recite a section of Scripture, which I didn't even say was the Bible, I just said Scripture, that was about the mark of the beast and how it was relevant to something that was written hundreds of years ago. Really. And nothing there. And you broke social distancing. You went through a group of people to grab me. And you're telling me that I was there and I was the one who didn't have the public health and safety in mind. Really. I'm sorry, but that, to me, that doesn't make sense. And to the 45,000 people or whatever else that are supporting me these days, they also see that this is a load of crap.
Yeah, you're spot on with about how the government defines what's essential and non-essential. And well, there's only been one coronavirus outbreak at an essential business, and that's that Cedar Meats in Brooklyn in Western Melbourne. There's been no cluster at any of the supermarkets or hairdressers. There's been no community transition at
Shopping centres, fire stations, ambulance stations, police stations, government buildings, Centrelink, and all these other places that are wall to wall with people. You're telling me there was none? There was no infections that went rampant through any of these places, but Cedar Meats. So the virus chose where it spread wants to go. That's what the government's telling people, and they expect anyone with half a brain who has a sense of intelligence to believe that.
And holding a government to account who is making the decisions about how to contain the virus is not an essential activity. That is quite convenient.
Yeah, 100%. Look, certain things you could look at and you go, okay, this makes sense. All right. But you can't say it's one way and then people aren't getting sick in another from the exact same circumstances. You can't say that people can't gather in a cafe and eat, but people can gather at the police station and be on top of each other and it doesn't spread. If it's contagious, it's contagious everywhere. It's not just contagious where it suits the government's narrative. That doesn't make sense. Anyone with any type of like common sense looking at all the situation would say, well, hang on, go and have a look at these construction sites in the city where they're doing these multi-level buildings.
No cases there.
You'd easily have 150 people working in these buildings, maybe 200 working in some of these construction sites. Where do they sit? They sit communally and eat in the lunch sets. Apparently, they don't even practice social distancing in it. Right? So no one got sick there. Not one construction site got shut down in the whole time this COVID was happening. Really, I find that convenient, considering the people who would own those and be running them would be the big guys. The guys who, are part of the upper quadrant of the people that control this world. Right? I find it very convenient that out of all the government institutions that have to do with controlling and maintaining order, there hasn't been, a COVID outbreak. Okay, yeah, that was one case. So how come there wasn't an outbreak? People are asymptomatic for up to 2 weeks, right? People can be asymptomatic and be transferable for 48 hours. So how come during that time, no one at a police station got people sick, right? No one at an ambulance station got people sick. No one in the supermarket got people sick. No one in a construction site got people sick and had to shut down a construction site. Why? Doesn't make sense.
Well, you're not going to get any disagreement from me on that. But the reason I think people became so compliant, and at the beginning I did support some of the social distancing. I didn't support a lockdown and house arrest because we didn't know much about this virus, and fear of the unknown. That's what fueled the panic buying. And we were told that the virus could be airborne and that it could be on surfaces to 3 or 4 days, but it doesn't seem that it is any more contagious than the flu. Obviously, it's not the flu, but I just told you how last winter that the flu was transmitted within my circle, which we're told that this is super contagious. And we were told that the deal was we've got to flatten the curve so our ICU wards aren't overwhelmed. We did that. As soon as that happened, then all these shutdowns should have ended. But then, of course, the government moved the goalpost and said, there might be a second and third wave. I'm not sure if you remember, Daniel Andrews wanted the convention exhibition centre for a morgue.
Yeah, we dropped out.
What was the last you heard?
Moving the goalposts.
Yes, how we've achieved flattening the curve, but things aren't allowed to go back to normal.
That wasn't the first goalpost they moved before they said second or third wave. They said, we want to track you. They said that's the only way we'll go back to normal. And they said they want to stick us with a vaccine for a virus that was around for 4 months. They didn't even know how to test it properly yet. And they couldn't even confirm this thing was real. And the government was already pushing vaccines for it.
Well, we've been told, and because there's never been a vaccine developed for any strand of the coronavirus. This is called COVID-19. This strand, it's also called bat coronavirus as well. But they want to, and we don't do this with the normal flu, track the exact source of the transmission. And people, they've forgotten that basically it's not a secret ingredient, but it's an untold ingredient of flattening the curve, was shutting Australia's borders. That's what really killed the virus, not because people weren't coming in from overseas. There was mandatory quarantine. So how is this, if we've got around 600 active cases now, how we supposed to go from here if we don't reopen international travel to Italy, where they have those factories full of hospital beds and coffins? I don't get how it's going to go. It's going to exponentially go from there.
Well, look, according to the way they said this thing spreads, if just one person gets out in 16 weeks, you'd have another. What did I calculate? I calculated compounding the doubling effect over 15 weeks of the number doubling each week of who was affected the week before. From one person just affecting one person over 15 weeks is 32,000 people. So if they're saying these things so like super contagious, we haven't even locked down the whole country yet. So they're talking about it for second and third wave. Second and third wave from where? The virus has already come through. So where's the second and third wave coming from exactly?
Well, they say that there could be undetected cases in the populace, which if they're undetected, then obviously those people are not going to be showing enough symptoms for them to be in ICU or even hospital.
So they're saying there's undetected cases.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And what's the question?
I'm saying I'm asking you to respond to their theory that we need to continue lockdown and widespread testing because we need to detect more cases of the virus, even though these people are already in the community asymptomatic, maybe passing it on, but they don't have enough symptoms to go to hospital or the ICU ward.
You're telling me there's a virus out there that's deadly, right? And people could be asymptomatic and passing it on and no one's dying.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Well, that's what they're saying.
So you're full of shit, excuse my language. The virus isn't as deadly as you say it is then. Because if it was, where's all the people that are getting sick and dying?
Well, we had
dying then.
We had of the 98 Australians who've died, only one is under 50. We've obviously heard the reports from overseas of apparently children and young people dying from coronavirus that apparently cripples your immune system, like AIDS. There hasn't been any young Australians who that's happened to. So I guess the only logical thing is that Australians are a bit made of a bit tougher things than apparently young people overseas.
Listen to the logic, right? This is how ridiculous what they're saying is, right? Listen to the logic. They're saying we need to test people because there's people out there that are asymptomatic spreading this thing, right? You've had 6,900 and something cases, almost 7,000. It's been 16 weeks. The virus after 2 weeks is meant to show symptoms, right? Yeah? Or you're meant to start getting sick. So this thing's either not deadly and people have got it and it's not as dangerous as they say it is, or they're lying and it doesn't exist. Because you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't say to me, oh, this virus is so deadly, we need to shut everything down because it's dangerous, people are dying, and then turn around saying, oh, for 4 months, people could be walking around, they're asymptomatic spreading it, it's deadly, but no one's dying. It doesn't matter which way you slice it, 98 people died. So what they're requesting of the public doesn't make sense. Every single time they come out with more information, more facts they want to do, more actions they want to take, they don't align with the information that's being provided, and they don't align with the rationale for how deadly and infectious this thing's meant to be. It doesn't make sense at all.
Well, if you look at the high-profile people in Australia who've got the coronavirus, obviously Tom Hanks was the first big name. He made a full recovery, wasn't really that sick. He gave it to, well, I think his wife did, Rita Wilson, gave it to Richard Wilkins, the Channel 9 celebrity reporter, and he said, I feel perfectly fine even though I've tested positive. Peter Dutton, Senator Andrew Bragg, Senator Rex Patrick, they all got the coronavirus, made a full recovery.
So what happened to the flu? The flu stopped when the coronavirus came through. No one caught the flu.
Well,
so the flu stopped when the coronavirus came through. That's what they're saying. So the influenza, that's extremely contagious, decided to stop, and now it was only coronavirus that people were subjected to.
Well, if you have a look at how this year's flu season is unpanning, 80% reduction in normal influenza infections. That's not because of the lockdown. That's because we're washing our hands more, the sanitizing and that, making sure that we're practicing better hygiene than maybe we did a year ago when we probably all got a bit slack, that's not a bad thing, but doesn't mean you're locked down society.
I personally don't believe that. I don't believe that's why the influenza has been lower. It's because people aren't outside in the millions like they were, and people aren't catching it. That's it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't bloody sanitize my hands every 2 seconds. I believe I have an immune system, and I use my nails and stuff like that. You know, that stuff there is your body's natural ability to build up an immune system. You know, you get bacteria under your fingernails. What's a natural human inclination? To bite your nails, right? You bite your nails because your body is trying to pick up all of this bacteria you're picking up around you. Your nose connects to your mouth, immediately straight to your mouth, right? It's because your airborne bacteria is being caught on the mucus in your nose, and you're breathing that, you're cleaning that through your mouth and spitting it out. That's why it connects, because you're building your immune system. So why are people not getting as sick with the flu? Because people haven't been outside catching it. You know what I mean? It's an airborne thing. So I don't care how much you sanitize your hands, you can still catch it by breathing it in.
Oh, yes, definitely.
They're not, you see what I mean? Look, I'm the type of person that if something doesn't make sense, I don't care who tells me, I'll go and figure it out, and I'll make my own decision. Right? And from the day go when all of this started, nothing seemed correct with the way this thing was spreading, with the concentration in certain countries, but not other countries. When it first came out in China, the countries surrounding China had not one case. And then you go and look at the fact that if this virus is meant to be asymptomatic for 14 days, right? True? These are facts. If the virus is asymptomatic for 14 days and they didn't know that people were sick in Wuhan until they started getting cases, how did they stop the spread of the virus in Wuhan only? What, not one person made their way out of Wuhan into another part of China and started breathing on someone? Is that what you're telling me? This thing, what? How are you going to know every single person that was at that market during that time? No one left. Not one person got out into China and spread that thing like wildfire until they figured out they were out there. You know, they wouldn't have even known they were sick for 48 hours or for 2 weeks. And they would have been spreading the virus and not even felt any symptom symptoms for 48 hours, if not even longer, according to, the gospel, the World Health Organization.
Now, even though you're not responding to the mainstream media, they're doing plenty of profiles on you, and they always mentioned that you were on reality TV back in 2017 with say your family's name again so it processes with me.
Yeah. Say that again.
Your family name, your surname.
Higgins.
Panayides.
Yeah.
Panayides. Yeah, the Panayides family was on this reality TV show called Family Food Fight. I didn't watch it. I don't watch much reality TV. You mentioned that what you're going through now with activism is nothing like that. And they've also profiled other anti-lockdown campaigners, Victor Tay, who runs the Exercise Your Rights Facebook page in Sydney.
I'm not an anti-lockdown activist. I am government stop bullshitting to your people activist. I don't care if you leave me locked in my house for another month. But start telling the people the truth, because the information you're telling people it doesn't make sense. The measures you're putting in place aren't practical, right? And the news that people are reporting about how dangerous this thing is completely inaccurate. I'm not an anti-lockdown protester, mate. I am a pro-truth advocate.
Well, I've got down on your description anti-lockdown activist, so forgive me for that.
No, that's okay, because that's how they're all trying to paint me at the moment. Because what they want to do, right? They want to villainize me so that the Australian public don't listen to what I've got to say, because they know I'm a danger. And the reason they're doing it and the reason they're going through anti-lockdown is because if they're saying I'm an anti-lockdown activist, and that sets the scene of, gives me the facade that I don't have the public's best interest in mind. But I do. Only reason I'm not following this anti-lockdown crap because it's a load of bullshit, and they're lying to everybody about it.
Well, and we can't keep living this quality of life being under house arrest. People have rightly talked about, when we say economic impact, that's businesses going under, which is a trigger for family breakdowns, mental health, suicides. We've had mental health experts come out. Who knows what will be the lockdown death toll in the next year or two? People haven't thought about that.
Well, look, at the end of the day, let's say, for instance, let's just put an idea out there. Let's say, for instance, there was a controlling interest that would like to, rewrite the laws and take control of a people, right? Let's say there was. Formulating a virus out of fear that would make people want to stay in their homes, and conveniently so, with that same virus, you could implement measures in the interest of public safety that would make sure people stand 1.5 meters away from each other. Though a sneeze can travel 6 meters, so that 1.5 meters ain't going to do nothing to stop the spread of a virus, right? And then you get rid of public gatherings of more than 10 people. So even if people wanted to protest, they can't, because you can protest, that's okay, but you can't stand with more than 10 people, right? So if they knew there was going to be an uprising or any type of resistance towards the movement, right? Well, they've got laws in place that are well engineered to take advantage of the fact that, if people try to speak out, they're not going to be able to, because of the fact of the laws that have been implemented in the interest of public safety. And they know that people are going to back them with these laws because of the fact that they're going to think they're for public safety. So no matter what happens to people out there, because they're trying to speak up, they're just going to be seen as people that don't care about people and don't care about people's lives. So it's perfect. It's a perfect plan. Like, whoever created what's going on is absolutely brilliant what they're doing. That's how well it's planned. It's disgusting to people, but from a strategic standpoint, what they've done and how they've implemented it, man, you are dealing with some very, very, very intelligent people who understand behavioral science to a T. They understand how to manipulate the media. They understand how to manipulate people through fear, right? And they understand how to use the police and all that stuff in order to intimidate people to maintain the narrative of the government will maintain control in the interest of public safety.
In my experience, that's just political salesmanship that they've been able to sell it to the people. And there's still plenty of petrified people who won't even touch their mail, even though if you get a package and somebody's got coronavirus or had coronavirus who packed it, it's gone in 24 hours because it's cardboard. That is the actual medical advice.
I think it was.
Oh, 24 is what I read. They said if it arrives the next day, then it's not going to be infected. But you mentioned that they called it, a lot of the media, anti-vaxxer, anti-5G protests, and we're seeing sort of we don't know whether there's going to be a vaccine for coronavirus, but they're urging everyone to get the annual flu vaccine, even though that doesn't protect against coronavirus. And you're seeing these NRL rugby players who will be banned from entering Queensland if they don't get the flu vaccination. And defending people's personal choice about what enters their body, that doesn't make you an anti-vaxxer. You can't force medicate anyone or force inject. You just can't do that. That's anti-freedom, period.
No, you can't. Of course you can't. Look, anti-vaxxers and all this, I've had a tuberculosis shot. I've dealt with, shots for malaria and stuff when I had to go overseas to Nepal. I've had Hep A shots, Hep B shots, right? I've had a tetanus injection. I don't have a problem with that. I'm not going to take an injection for a seasonal flu. I've never had one. I've never needed one. I've been in an office with hundreds of people that had a virus, had the flu, and everyone was dropping like flies, and I was the only one who didn't get sick, right? And now you're going to turn around and say that the best way to combat a virus that you guys don't even really know about is to stick the whole population with a vaccine that usually you guys would take 10 years to create and test before you implement. I'm sorry, no conflict of interest there whatsoever with the guys at the top. Let's not see if one of these politicians' wives or whatever else has interest in one of these pharmaceutical companies that are going to be implementing these vaccines. Because let's put it this way: vaccines make money for the pharmaceutical companies. And if you want to know how the pharmaceutical companies operate when it comes to vaccines, from my group, I have a female, who just for a laugh decided to hop into an anti-vaccine group and, just have a chat and see what their views were. When she went in there, the anti-vaccine people were pro-vaccine pushers. They were pushing pro-vaccines, right? They were pushing vaccines on people and saying how good they were. Now, she found that very peculiar. So I think a couple of days later, someone got in contact with her out of one of these sites, out of one of these pages. And he said to her, hey, listen, out of one of these groups, he said, hey, listen, he said, I don't want anyone to know this. I need to be careful speaking to you, but everyone in there are actually being paid by the pharmaceutical companies to push vaccines. All right, this is what she said. Now, she spoke to him later on, and she said, so how does it work? He goes, a handler gets in contact with us and we get paid by a separate company that has nothing to do with the pharmaceutical company. But we work for GSK. This is what pharmaceutical companies are doing.
Well, it's a smart, I would say, paying influencers is, that's the in word at the moment. That sounds like smart business.
Yeah, so look, I'm not an anti-vaxxer, man. I'm not an anti-5G person. I am a person who is not going to just let a government implement measures because they say they're safe when there are studies that all around the world that are turning around, and there are people all around the world who are successfully stopping the implementation of these towers. They're not stopping them because they're just handing them a piece of paper. They're obviously coming up with some substantiated evidence to back up their claim. Otherwise, the government's not just going to turn around and stop these things being built in certain areas. It doesn't work like that. You have to have some type of evidence to back up your claim, right? I'm not an anti-5G person. I am pro-intelligence, and if something has a possibility to hurt someone, then it shouldn't be implemented. Why did they get rid of solariums? One person died, and they got rid of them, right? Government had nothing to gain from it, but they were happy to destroy all these businesses in the process, right? True?
Well,
What's that got to do?
Sydney lockout laws, 2 one-punch deaths, they shut down all of Sydney's nightlife.
Yeah, right? So, look, at the end of the day, it's not about the interests of public safety. It's about what's best for the people up there and who's going to get their pockets lined the best. And you can see it with everything that happens when you see cotton mills taking away all the water from, a major water outlet, like the Darling River Basin, right? And the farmers are starving. Really, that's okay. That's really in the interest of Australian people. Yeah. So, people to sit there and say, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I'm not an anti-5G. I am a person who is sticking up for people because I'm sick of all the lies, and I'm sick of all the deception. I'm sick of all the media manipulating all the facts and only telling people half the story, right? And it's honestly time for some people to be brought to account for what they're doing, because at the moment, they're not just hurting a reputation of someone, they are endangering the entire mental health of a whole country at the moment, right? Nothing they're doing right now makes sense. And as I said, man, I'm not an anti-vax. I'm not anti-5G. I'm not anti-lockdowns. I am pro. Tell us the truth and stop lying to us.
That might be a good note to end on. I've got my next guest on hold. So just briefly, where to from here? Because obviously we've had a crazy week. You mentioned over 1,000 friend requests and messages. I was one of them. Your group stands at 42,000 members. So
it's insane, yeah.
So where do you think you'll go from here?
I wouldn't mind you giving me a plug to my YouTube channel that I've got going, because I'm going to start putting some content up there, and that's 99% Unite YouTube channel. It's us versus them. Look, I've been contacted from a couple of media outlets. I'm not going to do interviews with them. I'm working towards some stuff in the background, okay? I'm not going to fight the fact that the media is pushing some type of narrative that I'm a ex-reality TV star that's a conspiracy theorist. You know what? It just shows how threatened they are of me, considering they're going through so much work to make me look like a goose. So that's a good thing. You know why? Because it means I'm pushing buttons in the right area, and I'm doing actions that's hurting people in terms of their narrative, and they're really trying to discredit me. So you know what? More power to them. So to cut it short, YouTube, more than likely, my YouTube channel. And I'm going to do some investigating and really bring out some proper stuff that's going to be hard to deny, and, possible legal action for some people who are wronged by me.
Well, I think all of us who have heard you tonight and seen your recent videos are certainly looking forward to that. Thank you so much for your time. And yeah, we'll certainly see more of you probably tomorrow with another video.
Yeah, Tim, you're an absolute superstar, man. I love the way you run your show, and you do a great job and fantastic questions and really good flow, man. So,
thanks,
great
mate.
work.
All the best.
Thank you so much. Great night, guys. See you all later. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, that is the first half of the double feature for tonight. As I told you at the beginning of this show, this is the first WilmsFront for a week, so I obviously wanted to make the first show back a big one. which hopefully it has delivered so far. I'm going to bring my second guest on now. He's been calling for the last 5 minutes. Hello.
Hello, Tim. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Sorry that I had to decline your call. Had another interview in the first half. We can't see your video yet. There we are.
Good.
There we go. I'll just adjust the image here. Just bear. My audience will bear with me as well. So I'll provide a brief introduction of our second guest for tonight, Professor David Flint. You've had a distinguished legal academic career. You've been a media regulator and commentator, currently write for The Spectator and the Epoch Times, and you are the convener of the Australians for Constitutional Monarchy, where you ran and won the no case in 1999 referendum.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you for that very nice introduction.
And you're also an author of several books, and the one we're going to focus on tonight, this was published in, I should know because I worked for the publisher, Concord at the time, Give Us Back Our Country. It was 2013, was it?
2013, I think there was a second edition in 2015.
Yes. Now, it's appropriately, timelessly titled Give Us Back Our Country, and I've titled tonight's show Take Back Our Country, because that's what we've got to do in post-coronavirus pandemic world. We've got to, well, first get our freedom back, and second of all, make sure we're never in this situation again. I mentioned that you're a writer for the Epoch Times, which is a Chinese Communist Party dissident publication. And we've seen China, they've been threatening us. Now they're following through, stopping exports from Australia of barley and banning some of our abattoirs. And well, it seems now is the moment of truth. Are we going to cave and be bullied, or are we going to stand up and maybe bear the brunt of a tough time to build a more self-sufficient Australia?
Well, Tim, I think we should be very strong in this regard. We made a number of serious errors, as did much of the West over the last 20 years. And our great error was in relation to admitting foreign investment and treating corporations from the mainland as if they were Belgian or Dutch or British corporations, little different from any other foreign investor, and treating them on the same terms. They are very different. They are under the control and direction of the Chinese Communist Party, which is an alien force, which in no way respects the rule of law, and which plans to make China the dominant power in the world. We're very fortunate, we Australians, since the settlement. The dominant power in the world has always been a benign power, very similar to us, a similar system of law, speaking the same language, having the same values. The very first part of our life as a number of settled colonies and then a federal commonwealth. The dominant power in the world was Great Britain. That power has gradually moved to the United States of America, a very similar power, probably the most benign great power the world's ever seen. And if anybody doubts that, and there's a lot of anti-American propaganda, I think anybody who doubts that should look at the situation at the end of the Second World War. What other power in defeating Germany and in defeating Japan did not make any territorial claims, but instead acted in the most benign and benevolent way in giving great amounts of aid to those countries, which allowed them to restore themselves, making, I think, a great mistake in giving that aid. It should, of course, I think, been lent on the basis that it would be repaid when those powers were in a position to repay the money. But both Germany and Japan have had this great benefit. And during most of the post-Second World War period, they've also been defended against hostile powers. In the first instance, the Soviet Union and then China. They've been defended by the United States of America. So they've got a very good bargain from a most benign power. Now, we're fortunate that we have this. What some people in Australia, some people they've become like Lenin's useful idiots. They've accepted that China is a power like any other, which it isn't. And there are others who have gained significant advantages from the relationship with China in terms of money and influence there. But they have argued that we should gradually be surrendering our relationship with the United States to China. And they've admitted vast amounts of so-called foreign investment into Australia, which is not foreign investment, which has very dangerous implications and which has no advantage to us. We have, for example, the famous example of paddock to plate, where vast parts of our very best, our premium quality land, for example, in relation to dairy, has been handed over to companies which are really agents of the Chinese Communist Party. We saw that recently during the early part of this crisis over the Wuhan virus, in which, for example, Chinese real estate company in Sydney and other companies were instructed from Beijing to corner the market in masks and all sorts of medical equipment and get that equipment quickly to China, where it could be monopolized and sold outside at great advantage to those who had imported it. What we did in relation to paddock to plate has been an absolute disaster, and that has been permitted by federal governments of both sides. And that has involved those parts of Australia being worked for the benefit of a Chinese company, with the product being exported from Australia without even our gaining taxation from it, because it is a product within the same company. We have been treated very foolishly, and it's our politicians who have done that. And what we should be doing, I think in many ways we've mishandled the crisis, but that's another issue. But what we should be doing, and I think the government is right there, is looking to find out what exactly happened. And I would take it one step further than the government has said, and that is we should expect reparations. We have been seriously damaged by actions of the Chinese Communist government in suppressing the truth about the virus, in not warning the WHO, which they've turned into a puppet organization, in not warning the WHO early enough, so much so that it has been calculated by the University of Southampton that we could have probably saved about 95% of the deaths had the WHO and the world been advised early of a pandemic of which the government of China was fully aware. They suppressed the truth as to whether it would be transmissible between humans. They delayed the truth in relation to that. But worse, far worse, the worst thing they did, whether the virus escaped from a laboratory, whether they are engaged in weaponizing viruses, we don't even know that, and we probably will not know, certainly not before it's used. But what they did was that they sealed off Wuhan and the province in which it's located. They stopped travel within China, but they allowed, perhaps even encouraged, because it was the only place to go, they allowed vast amounts of travel from Wuhan to the rest of the world. thus transmitting the virus and knowingly transmitting the virus to a number of Western countries. Now, that was an appalling act. It was worse than negligent because it was done knowingly. It was deceitful. And for that, we should be paid reparations, damages. I've looked at the way in which I wrote a piece for the Epoch Times on this. I think it's a mistake to think that this can be achieved through the World Health Organization or the United Nations because of the effective control which the communist government will have over that. It's foolish to expect them to observe and apply international law because they did not do that in relation to one of the few tribunals which had any authority over them. That was the one which related to the South China Sea. The Philippines brought an action before that tribunal. The Chinese government had agreed to the jurisdiction of that tribunal many years ago when it signed up to the law of the sea. They'd probably forgotten that they'd done that because communist governments hardly ever will accept international jurisdictions. But they had accepted the jurisdiction of the tribunal in The Hague when the tribunal handed down its decision that what China was doing in relation to the South China Sea was against international law and that they had breached the rights of the Philippines and no doubt those of other countries with interest in the Philippines and the international community with a right to freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. What did the communist government do? They just tore the tribunal judgment up. They disregarded it. They said it was wrong. They had no recourse to go to any other tribunal. They just dismissed it. So even if there were some ruling by an international body saying that China breached her international obligations in relation to the virus, China would not accept that jurisdiction. What I've proposed, and it's in that piece in the Epoch Times, what I've proposed is something based on the Nuremberg Tribunal. We should establish an international commission with some like powers outside of the United Nations. And that commission should consist of eminent international judges who should, according to international law and the rules of evidence which apply in relation to international law, find out what happened, whether China breached her international legal obligations, of which I think there can be no doubt whatsoever. China is the culprit here. And that commission should be entitled, under the treaty which joins these countries, it should be entitled to make an award of damages. Now, obviously, the communist government would not pay those damages and would ridicule the tribunal and would make life difficult for the countries involved. But there is an easy way to recoup those reparations, and that is the vast amount of investments here by entities which are under the control of the Chinese Communist government. We could take all of those properties, those valuable premium pieces of real estate across the country, those strategic things like the lease over the Port of Darwin, all of those could be taken, and the Americans could do the same in relation to those assets within the United States under the ownership or control of the Beijing government. That is the way I think we should handle it. Now, obviously, China would react badly, and people say, "Oh, we mustn't do that. We mustn't worry the Chinese. We mustn't provoke them." I'm reminded very much of what happens when you become indulgent. If you become indulgent in life, you eat too much, you drink too much, you enjoy too much of a good thing. And that's what Australia has been doing. Not so much the Australian people, but powerful interests in Australia. Your doctor tells you to go on a diet. Well, I think Australia in many ways will have to go on a diet because the Chinese will react badly. When I say the Chinese, I mean the communist Chinese, because the Chinese people don't want this government. And if people challenge me on that, I would refer them to two elections. The last presidential election in Taiwan, where the Kuomintang, the old nationalist party, was showing much more pro-Beijing sentiments. The people overwhelmingly voted for the party which wants a free and independent Taiwan. And the same in Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, there were municipal elections on municipal issues, but nevertheless, the people of Hong Kong overwhelmingly rejected the candidates, the communist candidates, by an enormous percentage. It was a landslide. The Chinese people are also, like people everywhere, want to be free. They want to live under the rule of law. And this is what they really want. And I think we have to stand up to the communists. We can't continue in this situation. They've done a terrible thing around the world, and they will have to pay for that.
Oh, to our government's credit, and also the Labor opposition, they haven't blinked when China has made all these threats to the perfectly reasonable call for an independent international inquiry into the origins of the coronavirus, which we still don't know. There continues to be speculation about whether it was released from that lab in Wuhan or it was the wet market. We just don't know, because the Chinese Communist Party is so secret. And we are dealing with, we've seen the character of the Chinese Communist Party and its president for life now, Xi Jinping. It's an incredibly paranoid, insecure regime, which is why it lashes out at what we would see as legitimate human rights concerns and espionage.
Well, I think that's very true. I think that it is not going far enough to just have an inquiry as to what happened. I think there should also be power in an international body to award reparations. So I know that would be waving the red flag at a bull, as it were, but I still think that this is an important thing which should be done. We shouldn't be afraid of doing that. And I suspect that the United States may well be very interested in that, because they've suffered terribly, as most Western countries have, because of the mishandling of this. Whether it was done deliberately, we do not know, but we certainly know that in not telling us and in sealing off Wuhan, but allowing people to travel overseas, that part was deliberate, in that they knew that they would be creating a terrible crisis in other countries, and they knew that they should have been telling us the truth. And telling the truth is a very difficult thing for communist governments.
I remember would have been a couple of months ago, former House Speaker Bronwyn Bishop talk about how China, how they shut off Wuhan, but were letting flights going out to the rest of the world, and that brought the world economy to its knees. And she was dismissed, I think, by Nicholas Rees as a conspiracy theorist. But a month later, she said, "You all rubbished my theory, but look at the world now." And the argument has always been against standing up to China, is that they can ruin our economy and way of life. Well, how much worse can it get as it is now?
Exactly, and I think it would be worse to become a satellite of the People's Republic of China. That would be the very worst thing. Those immigrants who came to Australia from Eastern Europe, who came from satellite nations, knew how terrible it was living in those countries, and we certainly don't want a world in which the Chinese communists, the Beijing communists, are the dominant power in the world, and that's something which we must resist. And I think, to the great credit of the American president, he is the first president to stand up to China and to, for example, in relation to trade, and I'm sure in relation to the reparations which should be paid, I think he will stand up too in relation to that.
Well, the greatest asset to China in Western nations is the amount of self-hatred of the left, and we've seen that on display in Australia, where the the far left and the Greens, they've managed to convince the politicians to continually shoot our nation in the foot when it comes to our farmlands, water, agriculture, all our manufacturing's gone offshore. And they also have now clicked on to the identity politics weapon that you're criticizing us because you're xenophobic. They know, and we saw that, you mentioned Trump, we saw that on display yesterday when Trump told that journalist about the spread of the coronavirus asked China, and that was apparently racist because she happened to be an Asian American reporter, which that's just a perfect personification of, and I think it was Tony Abbott when he was Prime Minister talked about, he was talking about the ABC, but this broadly describes the Australia's left as a whole. They take every other side except the Australian national interest.
Well, I think you're very true, and we've always had this problem, and you have it more in a democracy than in a dictatorship because it's not tolerated in a dictatorship. But we've had similar groups. We had them in the Second World War. Hal Kolbach in The Secret War writes about the terrible things, the ways in which the Australian fighting forces were undermined on the waterfront, and to a certain extent in by some of the other unions in Australia. And that was a terrible and a treacherous act against the interests of Australia. What we're seeing now is a bigger movement, I would agree with you, and that is the dominance of the left in pushing all sorts of arguments which are against the interests of Australia. And to an extent, I think the mainstream media also plays a role in this, in tolerating all sorts of alien things which are against the interests of Australia. Every Western country is experiencing this. It's part and parcel of modern life, but it is for the rank and file, the people with common sense, and I think there's still a significant number of people, ordinary Australians, who reject the undermining of Australia and who don't wish to see Australia become a Chinese satellite. In the same way, in the United States, the doctrine of the Obama government of administration of managing the decline of America was rejected by those who voted for the president. And there's a very large number of Americans who support strongly the mantra that President Trump offered, that is, make America great again, and his idea that America would be restored to the great position to which she should have been entitled. Now, the West has been very foolish in relation to China, and America probably one of the most foolish, because so much of her wealth has been purloined, so much of her intellectual property has been either taken or forced out of American corporations who decided to invest in the People's Republic. And that has meant that America has effectively funded the wealth, the growth of the Chinese economy. We've, to an extent, done a similar thing. Our politicians have encouraged, I think, in many respects, the deindustrialization of Australia and the sending away of our industries overseas, quite often to communist China. And I don't think that's been in the interest of the Australian people.
Let's turn to your, we'll call it, also call it a manifesto, Give Us Back Our Country, which was co-written with Jai Martinkovitz, who you've also worked with Australians for Constitutional Monarchy. The pair of you headed up, it was one of the first efforts to counter Get Up's influence, Can Do. Since then, we've seen Right On emerge and also Advance Australia. And this, I remember, was during the Gillard years when our freedoms were really under attack. Well, when we first felt that sort of the paradigm was changing. The book split up into two parts: the problems and the principles. The overall message I got from the book is that politicians there needs to be more methods to hold them to account directly from the people, not just once every 3 or 4 years. Like, for example, in my home state of Victoria, we've only just today been released from house arrest, though none of us voted for this house arrest in the 2018 state election. Yet Daniel Andrews just speaks to us like children that this is what I think's good for you. You're going to cop it whether you like it or not.
What that book is based on, and Australians Take Back Your Country is based on, which will be a movement, it's based on the fact that representative democracy has declined in Australia. We were formed on the basis of this being a representative democracy, and very much on the Burkean principle that when you elect your representative, you vest them with the authority to take decisions which they believe to be the right decisions. But since then, the political parties have developed to such an extent that politicians no longer have minds of their own. They are instructed on how to vote. We have the appalling situation, for example, in the House of Representatives at question time, that the questions are written out on either side, and that the Speaker has lost the autonomy that he or she has at Westminster, where the Speaker actually chooses the people. The Speaker's told who to call. It's all a theatre, a fourth-rate theatre, but an appalling theatre, and it is a parody of a representative democracy. The political parties have so arranged things that most pre-selections, or many pre-selections, are no longer done by the members of the party. The members of the party have lost most of their powers. These have been taken over by power brokers within the parties who actually control the parties. The result has been that we have one of the worst systems of government in the Western world, particularly, for example, in relation to our federation, which is now the most centralised fiscally, far more than any other federation, so much so that Canberra collects about 80% of the taxes, hands back about half of that to the states, but instructs them on how to spend it, taking away the whole point of federation, which is that each state get its own income and be answerable to its electors in relation to the spending of that income, in relation to the powers that it has constitutionally. I often, when I'm speaking, ask people, I put a proposition to them, and I say to them, it seems to me, and I think it's unchallengeable, that not one of the significant problems in Australia, or all of the significant problems in Australia, have either been created by the politicians or been made significantly worse by them. I ask people to name some significant problem which wasn't either created by the politicians or made significantly worse by them. And I find that most people are unable to name a problem. I would say even in relation to the virus, they've completely mismanaged that. And if they'd followed world best practice, which was long ago set out by Taiwan, we would not have had a lockdown, for example, and we would have controlled entry in the first 2 months very strictly without being as lax as we were in those first 2 months, which allowed much of the virus in, which created those deaths. The country with the world's best practice, incidentally, is Taiwan. We have about 15 times the deaths of Taiwan, although we have similar populations. But going back to the politicians, in every significant area, the politicians have either created the problem or made it worse. Water, for example. We haven't had the whole idea of harvesting water, which is absolutely essential to make this country the great power that it was always intended to be, has been abandoned. It was abandoned under the Hawke government. Hawke intervened in purely state matters in Tasmania and stopped the building of dams, and the coalition has gone along with that. There's a dam to be built in New South Wales, but for many years we haven't seen dams, and we should be seeing so many. And in relation to electricity, we used to have the cheapest electricity in the world. Our electricity is now among the dearest in the world because of this decision by the politicians, although most of them don't believe in it by their behaviour, this obsession with global warming. And I don't think many of them actually believe in it, because they wouldn't have such enormous carbon dioxide footprints. And in education, we pour more and more money into education, but the standards keep falling and falling, so much so that in one notorious respect, our standards are lower than that of Kazakhstan's, the former People's Republic, and certainly lower in important respects than most of the countries to the north in Asia. And you just go over so many problems. Immigration, for example. We have extraordinarily high rates of immigration because we don't have the development we should be having. The immigrants naturally go into the 3 eastern capitals and just crowd those eastern capitals. There's no manufacturing work for the people. And that system is only being maintained because it helps increase the GDP, not the GDP per capita. It increases the gross GDP. So the politicians and the Reserve Bank can say, look, we haven't had a recession for a record number of years, which is a completely artificial situation. So many of the problems of today have been created or exacerbated by the politicians. And we say there's an answer to this. The federation of this country was going along, but it could never be achieved because when the Constitution was drafted by a convention, an appointed convention, went to what were then the colonial parliaments, the state parliaments, they all bickered among themselves. It would never have happened. It only happened because at Corowa, it was proposed at a People's Conference that in future, the convention be directly elected, and that, rather than sending back the draft to the state parliaments, the colonial parliaments, after consultation, it should be put to the people by way of referendums in each of the 6 colonies. That was adopted. That plan was eventually adopted in 1896. And within less than 4 years, we federated. We only federated because the people did it. The people directly elected the convention and the people approved the constitution. That's how we federated in less than 4 years, less than the time it takes to lay a tram track down George Street in Sydney. Now, that was the way to do it. We haven't reviewed that federation. We haven't reviewed our constitution in 120 years. And since then, we've had terrible things have happened. The politicians and the judges have rewritten the constitution without the permission of the people. I remember during the referendum, the Republican referendum, some people asked me, well, what if we win the referendum and the Republicans come back with a second referendum? So I did some research and found that whenever the same question was put for a second time, and some were put up to 5 times, the same subject area, not exactly the same question, it was always rejected by the people. So I calmed down constitutional monarchists on that point. But what I found was that all of those issues where the people had rejected handing over powers to the Commonwealth would no longer be necessary. And why would they no longer be necessary? Because the High Court had reinterpreted the Constitution, just as they've done in the United States. They've effectively changed the Constitution by interpretation. I think we desperately need to look at our Constitution, to go back to the principles of federation. And the principles of federation were that the states have certain powers, the Commonwealth have others, the states have independent sources of income. All that's been changed without the people ever agreeing to it. And that's an important thing. The second thing is we have to do something about the political parties. The political parties have cornered an enormous amount of wealth from governments through the grant of monies per vote and so on. They've got all sorts of exemptions from laws, the privacy laws and the electoral laws, and they've got certain advantages like the names of the parties on ballot papers and so on. What we've argued that is that this, in return for this cornucopia of legal privilege and exemptions and money, the parties should undertake and actually achieve to be what is normal in other countries, be open, transparent, and democratic. Just look at the last election in the United States. Just remember how President Trump got the nomination. It was done through a series of primaries in different states where supporters, not members of the party, supporters of the Republicans voted in different states, and that's how he emerges as the candidate. Similar thing happened with the Democrats, except that there was a bit of fraud going on there, and that was arranged. But the principle is there, and it's the same in Canada, and the same in Britain. It's the members of the parties, or the supporters of the party, who run the parties, not a group of power brokers who are getting rich because of their influence in the party, who put into Parliament people who they ensure are pre-selected. So much is confected. And I think we also should have more control over our politicians, and we should import from Switzerland the concept of direct democracy. That is, that the people should have a say. The Premier of South Australia at the time of the Federation, whose name escapes me, had a proposal which he took to a constitutional convention to introduce direct democracy into the Australian Constitution. And what he was going to propose was that the people could, by petition, and there'd have to be a certain number, by petition, they could reject laws adopted by the Parliament, something which happens in Switzerland. He was talked out of that by Alfred Deakin, who said, well, the principles of responsible government, that is, that the government rises and falls in the lower house, and the members of the lower house vote freely on that. Of course, they don't vote freely anymore. They vote as they are directed by their parties, and woe betide them. In Labour, you get expelled if you don't follow what are the party instructions. And effectively, the same thing happens with the Liberals, although they don't put that in writing. In most cases, you're in a lot of trouble if you deviate from what is the party line in the Liberal Party. So that's another important principle, that the parties be reformed, that the people be entitled to control their politicians by a right of recall. That is, by petition, they could ask for a new election in their electorate, which happens in a number of overseas countries, happens in a number of American states and in one Canadian province, and also the rule of the people by referendum. The people should be entitled by referendum to make all sorts of changes and to impose new laws, to decide whether treaties should be ratified. All of these things should be handed over to the people. Not many would come up, probably, in Australia, you never know, but in the ultimate analysis, even the High Court admits, the sovereign in Australia are the people of Australia. The sovereign power was with the people. And the preamble to the Constitution Act effectively says that, because it says, whereas the people of the several states, humbly relying on the blessings of Almighty God, have agreed to unite in an indissoluble federal commonwealth under the Crown and under the Constitution. It's all there in the Constitution, an agreement. It all depends on the people. And the people eventually should rule, and we should make sure that the people rule, because they would do a far better job than the politicians have done, who've created the terrible mess that we're living in today of a declining Australia. Tim.
Oh, you mentioned the High Court, which we've seen the rise over the past 50 plus years of judicial activism, which culminated in Australia with that decision that if a person was deemed to have Aboriginal ancestry, even if they weren't an Australian citizen, they could never be alien, which I don't know where they got that in the Constitution from. And probably overseas, the worst example was the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom decided that the Queen didn't have the power to prorogue Parliament, which quite perplexed me. But then we've also got the public service, the bureaucrats as well, who they make a lot of the decisions. And there's, of course, that famous 80s British satire, Yes Minister, Sir Humphrey Appleby. He's always like, we can outlive these ministers. We run the country. We feed them what to do in the name of the people.
I agree, and I think it's so important that the people have a greater say. Every 3 months in Switzerland, there are referendums. People would say, well, the politicians would say, oh, it's far too many, you couldn't possibly handle that. They handle it well in Switzerland, and these are referendums at the federal, state, and local government level. And these are important, and what we've got in Australia is this enormous centralisation. There's a centralisation in Canberra, then there's a centralisation, particularly in Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane. And those states, New South Wales and particularly Queensland, should not be as large as they are. We should have more states because there's no commonality between North Queensland, for example, and Brisbane. And the interests of North Queensland are different from those of Brisbane. In fact, the wealth of Queensland comes from North Queensland and is spent in Brisbane. And as with the massive amount of immigration that the federal government encourages, you get increasing numbers of seats in the cities. So more and more power goes to the cities, and the politicians act in the interests of the cities, but the wealth comes from outside of the cities in the country. And we see this in the current virus. I don't agree with the lockdown at all, but if we were to have a lockdown, it should be very different across the country. There's no reason why in vast parts of the country where there's no virus at all, why they should be closing everything down, why their cafes and restaurants and small businesses should be closed. And there's no point in that. And then you get these premiers pontificating, and the Premier of New South Wales saying, oh, we won't open these places today, we won't do it before Mother's Day, but we'll do it the following week. As if that would, what possible difference is that? And it is absolutely ridiculous. And it seems to me to be outrageous. When there is a real crisis, and this is a crisis, but it is a crisis which is manageable. We know from American research that many more people have been infected with the virus and that the death rate is probably closer to that of influenza. And there was no need to go overboard with the lockdown because they didn't do it in Taiwan. And Taiwan, with a similar population, has had 6 deaths, and Australia has what, I suppose, about 100 now.
98 is the exact figure right now.
Yes. So we invest too much power in these people, and once they get the power, they become power crazy. And then there are elements of the left who see that and want to use that for other purposes. There was a letter, as you know, to Le Monde recently by a number of celebrities, Robert De Niro and Madonna and Jane Fonda and our own Kate Blanchett, all protesting about the horrors of global warming, which they say is created by the CO2 emissions, because they would have vast footprints, much larger than anybody watching
Kate Blanchett,
this.
She's
yes, when you have a private
commuting between Australia and the US.
Yes, when you have a private jet and you have 3 or 4 mansions across the country and vast numbers of servants in those mansions, your CO2 footprint, your contribution to global warming, if carbon dioxide is causing global warming, you're really the culprit. But that they saw what was done in relation to these excessive lockdowns, I think, and they've argued that these should be permanent, that there should be no return to normal, that we should be closing down everything except, of course, their private jets and their mansions everywhere and their vast limousines and so on. And they're eating in wonderful palatial restaurants, but they believe that everybody else. It's like Professor Lockdown, Professor Neil Ferguson, the famous computer modeler who predicted all these vast numbers. I think 2.2 million deaths in America, and I think his thesis, the way in which he calculated deaths from the virus, probably produced the 150,000, which was predicted in Australia. Well, he is typical of the elites in that he follows the principle of do as I say, not as I do. Do as I say, not as I do. And while he was telling everybody, instructing everybody to stay at home and only have these very minimal outside relationships, was arranging secret assignations with his mistress. And for that, he's had to obviously resign. But it just demonstrates, and a number of leading ministers and public officials in Australia have been found out in a similar way. They've told us what to do. They've got people with loud hailers. I saw this down at Bondi Beach. A woman with a loud hailer closing off a path around the rocks, and then she saw a boy on a surfboard, well out. He couldn't be infecting anybody. It certainly wasn't in breach of the rules. He was well out on a surfboard. He'd probably got it to the sea, excuse me, from the rocks, and she was ordering back to shore, for which she had no power. But she was so drunk with power like the premiers and the prime minister, who were ordering everybody around, minutely ruling our lives, but destroying businesses. Many of those businesses in centres, in the shopping centres that you go around, many of them will never reopen again. The people who had jobs there will never get jobs again. It's been a wave of destruction, and they haven't thought it out properly. And I just think that we really have to assume much more power over the politicians, because I think I have much greater faith, and I'm sure you have much greater faith, in the common sense of ordinary Australians and the way in which they would run the country, rather than this elite group of politicians who run it as if they were some aristocracy at Versailles.
The expression is the people vote with their feet, and obviously the public could sense that the worst of the virus was over, and so even in our state of Victoria, where we were all banned from seeing our mothers for Mother's Day, the shopping centres, they were completely packed, and the traffic on the road was quite heavy, but no, couldn't visit Mum. And as we saw on the steps of Victoria's Parliament House, you couldn't ask questions of your government and hold them to account.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And when we consider what destruction has been wrought and the enormous debt which is being imposed on younger people like you, it is absolutely appalling. And for what point? Does this mean every time there's a pandemic, and we have them every few years, does this mean that every time one is coming to Australia, that we'll have to close down the economy? And of course, it means closing down the productive part of the economy, the private sector, while the public sector goes on enjoying all of its privileges, not sacrificing any of its privileges whatsoever, while those in small business who are struggling away are the ones, and the ones who are employed by them are the ones who suffer.
We've got about 10 minutes left, so let's move on to probably your biggest success in activism, which was defeating winning the no vote in the 1999 Republican referendum. Is it unfair to say that maybe your greatest asset at the time was Malcolm Turnbull leading the Republican movement?
Well, he certainly was an asset because the way in which he ran it. But what they proposed, and like so many so-called Republicans, they were fake Republicans. They weren't real Republicans. The whole point of changing our constitution is that it should improve the governance of Australia. Just because they don't like the Queen or they don't like the royal family, that is not sufficient ground to change. And they couldn't even work out a reason for it. Eventually, the reason that they gave was that we had to have an Australian as head of state, but every government of Australia holds out the Governor-General as the Australian head of state. And in the 2016 election, although he campaigned on the basis that we needed an Australian as head of state, when Malcolm Turnbull was attacked for not being present was the reception of the remains of Australian soldiers which were brought back to Australia from Vietnam. His excuse, which he broadcast over Macquarie Radio, was that well, there was no need for him to be present for that reception because we had the Australian head of state there, the Governor-General, the head of state. And that's the reason for changing the Constitution. What they put up for change was an appalling, faulty change, condemned at a meeting at the University of New South Wales by many eminent lawyers and all sorts of political experts and so on, some of whom, to their great discredit, then campaigned for it in the referendum. But what was generally reviled about it was that it would have vastly increased the powers of the Prime Minister, because the President, it would have been the only republic in the world in recorded history in which the Prime Minister would find it more easy to sack the President than his driver. He could sack the President without grounds, without notice, and without any right of appeal. That would turn the President into a puppet of the Prime Minister. And that would mean that on those significant occasions when the Governor-General has to exercise supervisory powers, the Governor-General would be completely the puppet of the Prime Minister, which would be very bad. We say, and I think it's a long-held principle, that the Crown is important in the Constitution, not for the power it wields, but the power it denies others. That is, to do a number of things, the Prime Minister or the ministers have to seek the approval of the Governor-General. And that's a way in which you have a check and balance in our constitutional monarchy. We had the choice, and it was carefully considered at the time of federation, of moving to an executive form of government, an executive presidency. And we adopted a lot from the American Constitution. We, of all countries in the world, are the child of both the United Kingdom and the United States. And we took a lot from the American Constitution. We made some mistakes there, but we certainly took a lot from the American Constitution, but we decided to keep the idea of responsible government. That is what emerged in Britain just before Queen Victoria, and that is the present constitutional monarchy. I call it Constitutional Monarchy Mark II. This is different from the first constitutional monarchy from the Glorious Revolution of 1688. Constitutional Monarchy Mark II has the Crown exercising only a constitutional supervision in the Constitution, but not exercising political power, which was the case under the earlier form of the constitutional monarchy. And that is a very good system. Of all the systems in the world which have been exported and lasted for a reasonable period of time, only the English system has done that. The American system, they've tried to export the American system, and it's worked for a short while sometimes, but then it's ended up in dictatorship. Even when it was exported to France in 1848 under the Second Republic, within a short period of time, it had been converted into an authoritarian empire. It had changed. It's never worked anywhere in the world for long. The constitutional monarchy, as we've noticed, as the British developed it, has worked well. It's even worked well, interestingly, in the Middle East, in Arab countries, in Muslim countries like Afghanistan, where it's worked superbly. It's only been brought down by the military following Nasser and seizing power, but it's worked very well in the Middle East, and it still works in Jordan, for example. But it is a very elegant and sophisticated system of government. If we're going to keep the system of government, which was the idea from Turnbull and Keating, was to keep our system of government, not to go to the American system of government of an executive presidency, We're going to keep that. The system we have works very well. There are other parts of the Constitution which do not work appallingly, which need to be corrected. The Crown, exercised principally by the Governors General and the governors, works very well. It's very efficient, doesn't cost us a lot of money, and it's something which is not the weak point of the constitutional system and should be kept.
The attitude of the ordinary Australian, or as it's termed now, the term is the quiet Australian, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And obviously the Republican push in the 90s was assisted by the royal divorces, and we've seen recently the royal family embroiled in quite salacious headlines with it's termed Megxit, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's departure from the royal family, and obviously Prince Andrew's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, convicted sex offender. But obviously the Queen Elizabeth II, she has been the model monarch throughout, and she's always managed these crises, and everybody's sort of wondering when, and everyone's saying long may she reign, but nobody lives forever. And Prince Charles, he is noted for his social activism on issues such as climate change, so is Prince William, and monarchies tend to only fall if they start to interfere in the operations of government. I'm not sure if you've ever seen the second miniseries in the British House of Cards trilogy, when the new king interferes in Francis Urquhart's government. Obviously you know the royal family more than any of us. When Prince Charles becomes king and then William, do you think that there could be these governance issues which could arise, which haven't occurred in the British monarchy since, obviously, we go back to, I think it was the Glorious Revolution?
The Republicans always have a silver bullet, and the silver bullet is, for many, including Mr. Turnbull, is the end of this reign. At the end of this reign, the Australian people, like the people of the world, will be fascinated. There will be sadness, and there'll be a retrospective, an enormous retrospective. It'll be a major media retrospective of the life and times of Elizabeth, and what a perfect monarch she was. And then there'll be fascination, great fascination over not only the new king, but the new king's family and the successor, who will be the Prince of Wales. But there'll be remarkable interest in the only remaining coronation in which the king is not only crowned but set aside, and that will be a matter of enormous interest. The last thing Australians will be thinking of will be turning Australia into a republic. I think that Prince Charles will, when he's king, I think he'll be a good king. I think he will forget his flirtation with global warming. He'll probably still be a global warmist. He'll realise that the projections which he's believed in, like all computer projections, have been wrong, and that the world has not ended or is not about to end, as has been projected. And I don't think he will be in any way pushing that. I was looking at that question of Prince Charles taking a position in relation to global warming, and then I thought, but on the other hand, every prime minister of every realm, and there are 16 of them, and every leader of the opposition of every realm is a supporter of global warming, such as the way in which it has impacted in the electoral systems of the world. But I think he will steer away from that, which is his principal weakness. And I don't see him behaving in any other way than as a constitutional monarch. Constitutional monarchs are not expected to be infallible, but they're expected not to talk about matters which in any way can be seen as political. And I think he will realize that in relation to global warming. I think his reign will be short, obviously, but I don't think William will become involved in any matters political. I think he will be a good king. So we have a number of monarchs ahead of us. The monarchy since the Glorious Revolution, in fact, the monarchy developed by the Glorious Revolution is essentially one which requires that the people accept the monarch, and if the monarch is not acceptable to the people, then the monarch should go. It has that fragile side, and that reflects the fact that the Australian Constitution, I think, the constitutional system, right back, if you go back to the time of the Glorious Revolution, I think it is accepted, and Bolingbroke put it wonderfully when he described the Constitution as that assembly of laws, institutions and customs by which the people have agreed to be governed. Constitutional system requires the agreement of the people. We have that specifically in our Constitution, in the referendum. The others tend not to have that and leave it to Parliament or special majorities and so on. So I think the Queen made it very clear during the referendum. She took no part, she didn't campaign. She said it's a matter for the Australian people, and I think that will be very clear. The incumbent must be accepted by the people. If the incumbent becomes unaccepted, then that incumbent has to go under the system of constitutional monarchy. And there are others in waiting who might be prepared to take the decision. I think it works. It's a good system. It works. It means that we have the representatives, the viceroys, the governors general and governors. That overall works well. There haven't been many who have been lemons who've had to go. And I think it's a very effective system and works better than Westminster republics. The alternative, if we were to change, the alternative is to go to the American system and have an executive presidency. But again, it doesn't guarantee great leadership. No political system guarantees great leadership. As you know, Tim, great political leaders are pretty rare. You don't often get a Margaret Thatcher. You don't often get a Winston Churchill or Ronald Reagan. These don't come along often, and the system doesn't provide it, but it does. It should allow them to emerge easily. The American system has the great advantage, as we saw with President Trump, and not everybody will agree with me that he is a great president, but the system does allow somebody to emerge from outside. It has that virtue, whereas our system, not so much the British, because the party can elect the leader, but under our system, the leader has to emerge through the Parliament. In America, in Great Britain and Canada, the leader can emerge from the party, and that person then is put into Parliament. The Canadians have had examples of that, and that I think is the way our party should be going. But we have political parties which are the most backward in the Western world.
Look at the last decade in Australian politics. No Prime Minister has been able to serve out a full term. They're removed by their party, which I think says a lot. Let's finish off with, obviously it was the biggest news, non-coronavirus news story yesterday, the retirement from radio of Alan Jones, #1 broadcaster in Sydney for many years. I don't have the exact number of consecutive surveys that he won, but it was a record. I know that you and him have been friends for many years. You wrote a tribute to his career in the Spectator yesterday. He is 79 years old. He's had cancer, he's had back surgery, and in the end he did take the doctor's advice that he did need to cut back, and obviously there were the usual detractors who celebrated, but he's still going to be on Sky News twice a week and also his newspaper columns, and certainly a reduced capacity Alan Jones for a few extra years is certainly better than if he just went all out in detriment to his health. But he has had when we talk about influence, it's been influence for the better. It's not, you don't get too many media commentators and journalists who can instruct fear in politicians that they're up against somebody who's going to hold them to account, has done their homework, knows their facts and figures, and doesn't matter whether you're a Liberal or Labor. If you were trying to duck and weave responsibility or were neglecting something, he'd let you know, and he'd get an answer from you. And he'd also champion a lot of small business people, farmers, rural people. He was obviously had a affiliation to the Liberal Party, but he championed what he believed was right, and he's had an extraordinary life, starting off as growing up on a farm, being a teacher, then becoming a rugby coach, and now a broadcaster. It's an extraordinary life.
Yes, it is an amazing life. In ancient Rome, there used to be magistrates who were appointed specifically to look out for the interests of the people with special powers, the tribunes. And I call that peace and spectator Alan Jones Tribune of the People, because in many ways he was that. I was thinking about his influence, and I thought today he probably, as just an individual, is more influential than all the commentators on the ABC collectively. He is really extraordinarily influential. I don't see that going. He is a remarkable person because in that piece I likened him to a Renaissance prince, in the sense that he unites in his person and a strong interest in politics, the life of the city-state, the Commonwealth. He has an extraordinary interest in the arts and in sports. He was probably the most successful coach of the Wallabies in the history of that team. He has this very wide interest of activities. He is extraordinarily generous, both in relation to his time and his resources concerning charities and matters of people who are in need. And he really is an exceptional person, and I do regard him very highly as the tribune of the people. And I think he's, I think back, for example, to the referendum. In the referendum, all of the mainstream media, commercial and public, like the ABC, and print and electronic, all of them were overwhelmingly, next to unanimously in favour of attacking the Crown. Some of them said they were real Republicans, were a bit confused about that, a couple of newspapers, but they were all opposed to the Crown. One prominent person came out, that was Alan Jones, which required enormous courage because you were ridiculed if you took that position, although we did win. We won nationally, we won every state, and we won 72% of electorates, which, if you translated that into electoral terms, would have been a landslide in the House of Representatives. And he was a significant force in relation to that. When people used to ring him up and they were undecided, he developed a line which became one of our wonderful slogans. And that was, if you don't know, vote no. If you don't know, vote no. And that was very effective. And he's run a number of campaigns. He's always running campaigns. in favour of individuals or in favour of causes which are being overlooked by the politicians. And you're right, he strikes fear into the hearts of politicians. And I'm sure the bottles of champagne were opened yesterday when he announced his departure from radio. I noticed that it's very interesting. There's a restrictive requirement, the sort of thing that you have when you're a valuable asset. He can't go into radio again until I think June of next year. And does that mean that he may emerge in an audio way? Again, I wouldn't rule that out. He'll certainly be there on television. He has the column in the Telegraph, which is very influential.
Does that clause cover podcasts? I think
Yes,
that's what you're alluding to.
That's an interesting point. I was thinking of asking that, whether have a look at the exclusions, because it'll be interesting. I would not rule that out. In the same way that John Law,
he couldn't stay away.
Yes, he had to go, and he went to 2SM, which used to be the Catholic station in Sydney, and that has a very large rural network, which they stay with John Law. So I think in many ways Alan Jones is like Rush Limbaugh in the United States, I think he has, the last time I looked, there was over 40 million listeners. Now, audio is very strong, and that is the field in which Alan Jones makes his strongest mark. And I think it may be difficult for him to stay away from it. I can understand that the getting up at 2:30 and running the program for over 3 hours. What is it? 5:40 to 9.
And replying to every correspondence he gets, which is that's incredible as well, to get a reply from somebody such as him, and he reads all the reports and goes through the documents. It's incredible.
Yes, I notice that the American system from which we take ours is much more like what you're doing. It involves one person running it for 3 hours without many calls coming in, although it's called talkback. The talkback part, at least the big ones like Rush Limbaugh, seem to not involve much talkback at all. Not as much advertising. We seem to have much more advertising than they do in the United States. And as you say, with the development of technology, podcasts, I think it's only in the last couple of years that Alan has gone into Facebook, but the impact has been enormous with the viewings. The number of people looking at his posts is quite extraordinary, and they do have an enormous impact, and I should imagine that will continue. You may not remember, he used to have a daily comment which went out on 9. Channel 9.
I do remember that. I am old enough to remember that.
And when young James Packer, sold 9, almost the day he sold it, the people, no doubt the left wing on Channel 9, the journalists immediately got rid of that. Although the whole country, large numbers of people used to tell me, we come in from the field to hear that, because they didn't hear Alan on radio because the national network didn't go that far in those days, but they used to come in to hear him on television, where he'd give a comment which only went for 3 or 4 minutes, but it was very influential, and I could see him doing that sort of thing again. So beware, politicians. Don't think you've been let off.
And Alan would admit that sometimes in the heat of the moment he has gone too far, and he's admitted that. We won't go through those times here, but even the people who vowed they'd never go on his show again, or who he was quite relentless in attacking, they still went back on his show. The Greens MPs, when they were talking about coal seam gas, they were happy to go on Alan Jones's show to talk about it. And Clover Moore, when I think she was talking about one of her recycling programs. Even I won't repeat the comments, but even after all that, Clovermore was still happy to go on.
It's so true. And sometimes people would grab something and use it as a method to attack it. For example, there's a saying, "Put a sock in it," and that's a very common saying. He put it in unusual terms. I don't think he meant to put it in the way that he did, but that was seized on, and I'm sure that the New Zealand Prime Minister.
Oh, she wasn't. So she didn't really care in the end. It was all the people on Twitter who decided to be, which is common these days, be offended on her behalf. She just said, "Oh well, the All Blacks beat the Wallabies on the weekend. That's revenge enough for me."
And she deserved to be reprimanded because she was telling us about our failure to observe the rules against global warming, whereas we were doing better. If that's an important thing, I don't think it is, because that's an important thing than New Zealand was. In any way, I think politicians are quite used to being abused. Just listen to Question Time in Australia, not so much in Britain, where it's more dignified. But some of the things he said were. There was one thing I remember. He used I won't use the phrase, but it's like something in a woodpile. I won't use the phrase.
Yes.
It's offensive, but that was a phrase which was common when I was a boy. You heard it.
Oh well, when he worked on the farm, which obviously, you don't. It's not the darn thing these days. We talked about how he instilled fear in politicians, and certainly some of them will be celebrating, but he did get the Prime Minister and the Premier of New South Wales ring him up to revere his career. And I think a lot of those that he grilled over the years, they would concede they did make him better politicians. And I think I saw Peter Credlin last night on Sky talk about when she was Tony Abbott's chief of staff, when they got something from Alan, it was treated very seriously. And it's the same as when he was a coach and a teacher. He was tough, but that's how you build skill and character. And I remember I spoke to somebody who was his pupil at, I think it was Brisbane Grammar, who said that he was a tough teacher, but you were never bored in his class, and you definitely did learn.
Well, I can imagine that. He is really a splendid person. And I think I can well understand why the rigidity and the discipline and the time that was involved in that program has become too much. But I think he will continue to be a force in Australia, and I think a force for good. We all make mistakes, but essentially a force for good.
When you speak for what he did, 3.5 hours every day, every weekday, 5 days a week for most weeks of the year, and I do. Well, this total stream has gone for, at present, over 2 hours. You're bound to say something which is factually incorrect, or you didn't put it eloquently as that. That's part of being in the public eye. But Alan, overall, he has done tremendous service to Australia. We'll leave it there because we've gone way over time, but I've appreciated your time tonight, Professor David Flint. connorcourtpublishing.com.au is where you can purchase this book. I don't think my plug can maybe sell as many as being on the Alan Jones show did, but every bit helps.
And may I add that there is a petition about which summarizes the principles of that book. It's in my name. I think there are two. If you go to change.org and you Google it, you'll find two. I think one is to have me dismissed from something, So ignore that one because it's no longer relevant anyway. It may not still be there. But the other is this one, Australians Take Back Your Country. And it really sets out what we would try to do with a convention and what we would try to attain in the reform and review of the Constitution of Australia to make the politicians more accountable and empower the people.
And I'll provide a link to that petition in the show notes page. So once again, thank you for your time. All the best into the future. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you very much, Tim. It's been a pleasure for me, and thank you for the opportunity to speak and the time that you allowed me to talk.
Thank you. All right, as I promised, the first WilmsFront program back after a week would be an epic one, and it certainly has turned out to be. I know that Dee Beltran, she's well into her weekly live stream with Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, probably the most famous or infamous vaccine skeptic in the world. She was banned from Australia. So feel free, everybody, to tune into that now. But for the record, just so it's on the stream, I'm just going to talk about why I took a few days off. Regular viewers of this show would be aware that there was no WilmsFront Monday and no Uncockables Tuesday. In my social media, I stated my reasons were to take a bit of a breather and relax. It's been such a busy 2 months covering the coronavirus pandemic and national lockdown. Australia's been in a situation where a simple press conference by any of our leaders can significantly change life as we know it and affect our lives greatly into the future. So keeping abreast of all the details and information following every such announcement or press conference is no simple task. Last 2 months, cooped up here have certainly taken a toll physically and mentally on myself, but so has it for millions of other Australians. So there's been a lot of talk about the new normal, so I'd like to begin to announce what will be my new normal going forward. So starting this week, I'll be reducing my on-air schedule to 3 nights a week. WilmsFront will air weekly on Wednesdays, starting earlier. I think it was going to be 6:30, but I will probably now start 6 p.m. Wednesday evenings, a weekly WilmsFront edition. Uncockables will return once a week in its traditional Thursday night time slot of 8:30 p.m. Melbourne time, and then Trad Tasman Talk with Dua Debor will round out the week at 6 p.m. Melbourne time. There'll still be some weeks with additional WilmsFront or Uncuckable show, but they'll simply be special extra shows and will not have a regular schedule. Because I've been so busy with show production, I haven't had as much time as I would like to write in-depth articles and essay, which I've missed doing. So I plan to utilize that freed up time to publish a bit more written content on the unshackled.net. I've also got some plans to diversify the content on the Unshackled.net. In addition to our news and essay section, we plan to launch a history section, which will launch with some Australian history essays by Australian Meditations and an arts and entertainment review section. If you are interested in contributing to the news site sections or in any other way to the Unshackled, please fill out your details at the unshackled.net/stories. James Fox Higgins, I saw return to his lunchtime show today after a week and a half off. He has also decided to roll back his show to 3 days a week, still plans to continue with the Patriarch Hour and relaunch his Foxy's Friday music show. I didn't know about any of this until he was on air today. He hasn't responded to my emails for over a week. He also announced that he is reworking Rational Rise TV since the site reached capacity a few weeks back, and he's looking at a new interface and server and storage arrangement to merge both RationalRise.tv and his social network, the Champions of Light, into one super site, which will act as a central hub for all partner content creators in the alt media and our respective communities. He hasn't consulted me on any of this because, well, he did make it clear when the Unshackled agreed to be part of Rational Rise TV that James, he was more the dictator of Rational Rise TV rather than the director. So, yeah, I do understand what I signed up to, but I know he's been working hard at that. You have to understand with all our shows that a lot of what we do off air is spent on back end work to make sure we have the capacity to bring you the content we produce in the most professional and effective way. Some more news about Unshackled Productions going forward is that they'll all be permanently produced and broadcast from my new home studio. In the age of continued social distancing, there is no purpose to us having a dedicated broadcast studio to have guests and panelists in person. So we are in the process of moving out of our broadcast premises. I'll continue to dress up my home studio setting as well. As you can see, as it's slowly evolved since I first set it up. We plan to invest the savings made into other projects intended to further increase our virtual reach and future-proof our operation against any more deplatforming. As I said at the beginning of the show, Victorians were released from house arrest today, but the state of emergency has been extended. A fifth reason to leave the house is to visit family and friends. You can have up to 5 visitors from other households to your house, and up to 10 people can gather in public socially. And also golf, hunting and fishing are now allowed. Gun and ammunition can be sold again. We had Treasurer Josh Frydenberg on Tuesday deliver the grim economic news. He broke out into a coughing fit mid-speech. He did get coronavirus tested as a precaution, turned up negative. I've had that happen before. You just talk so much that your mouth dries out there. So that is it for the show tonight, the first WilmsFront Weekly. And of course, I'll be back tomorrow night with the Unshackled team, 8:30 p.m. Melbourne time, on the show's YouTube and DLive channel. Thank you, everyone, for watching tonight. Sorry I could not get to your questions. It was such a epic, crazy episode. I just didn't have time managing everything. So please forgive me. All right. Good night, everybody, and stay safe, stay free as well. Good night.
Thanks for tuning in to WilmsFront. Visit timwilms.com or Rational Rise TV to view the archive of episodes. And keep visiting the unshackled.net to view all our shows. And to keep up with the latest